This is the Real Estate Investing 365 podcast, your go-to source for real estate investing strategies so you can start living the life you want and get where you want to go. With your host, Justin Hanna.
Allie, welcome back. Thanks for being here. How's it going?
It's going. I'm so excited to be back, and it's flattering you let me come back.
Absolutely.
You never know. It's like, did they like me? I don't know.
Heck yeah. No, absolutely. She's on an episode a few back, and I was being a slacker podcast host, and I couldn't find the exact episode number. So if you guys are listening, and you want to hear her full story, go back and type in Allie Boone into the search. You can find her. But Allie was a engineer, aerospace engineer, right? And then you kind of got sick of that, the cubicle job, the day-to-day work life, went real estate full time. And now you're here writing books and still investing in real estate, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
cool.
it.
Why don't you give everybody, if they hadn't heard, a little background kind of into your previous life and then why you got started in real estate first?
Sure. Real estate was kind of an accident, kind of an intentional accident, kind of not. So I grew up with a typical go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a degree, get a secure job, like the typical mindset. So I did all of that. My family is in aviation, so I had become a pilot. I was a flight instructor through grad school, and I decided I didn't want to be a pilot full time. So I switched to aerospace engineering. I was certain that would be exactly the same thing as flying an airplane. Absolutely not true.
Yeah.
But I went and got a master's degree in that. And like I said, flight instructed through that. So I got what people would consider to be the dream job. You know, here I am, like, what better secured job than something in aerospace engineering, good paying, corporate, everything. And, my famous story is I walked into my very first cubicle for the first time. And before I ever sat down, I was like, I got to get out of here. I knew, like, I was like, uh-oh. I just went through a lot of school and paid a lot of tuition and flight training. Like, I knew it just wasn't going to be me. But I didn't know how to get out of it either. It's kind of like, how do I get out of my corporate job? Because I have to make a living. So I spent the next 5 years just trying to research everything. I was reading every paperback book I could find. I wasn't as big of an online type of researcher, but I was reading books, following the Rich Dad series. Like, I was trying to just figure out how to get out of corporate. I wasn't even set on how that was going to happen, but I kind of narrowed it down. It was going to have to be start a business or get involved in real estate investing. Those seem to be the two things that kind of, seem to be the tickets out of a corporate job. So I had actually decided to start a business. I didn't even know what kind, when I got a notification for a random investment opportunity. I had subscribed to every newsletter on the planet, trying to entertain myself and figure out my way out of here. And so I ended up pursuing that, just thinking, while I still have a good paying job, corporate W-2, I can get loans, I might as well invest for myself to do something smart with the money while I still can. And what I didn't know what was going to happen is, through all the people I met through that, through the networking, through just kind of how the whole thing played out, I ended up leaving, ironically, to start a real estate investing business. I had separated those two things in the past, but yeah, I mean, the details are in the previous episode, but that's what I've been doing since I left corporate in 2012. Been a corporate dropout ever since, living the entrepreneur life. Oh my God, I feel like I should have a helmet on most of the time. Real estate, I was investing for myself and starting the company at the same time. I help people invest. And a few years ago, I had started writing a book, because there's a lot, I'm a little bit different than a lot of real estate investors in that most people are focused on the technical aspect of it, which obviously you kind of have to be. You have to figure that out in order to invest. But what I've really seen over the years is there's such a big mindset component that's missing, that people get in trouble in real estate investing all the time. They're either pursuing strategies that maybe aren't fit to them. You don't know who you can trust in this industry. You Google how to be a real estate investor. It's just a bunch of how-to guides that show up. Cool, those are great, except how do you know which one you should be following, or who should you be listening to? Who's the scammer? There's just so many unknowns in this, kind of complicated industry, just because none of us learned this in school. So over the years, I was really kind of watching people and how they would get in trouble. And that's what I kind of started writing a book about. And then when our beloved 2020 hit and the COVID quarantine doors hit, I was like, oh, guess I had to maybe finish that book. So I just recently put out my first book called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing, Life Lessons on Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet. And it turns out, while I hate publishing books, I love writing and I love sharing things I've learned over the years. So that's kind of what I've been working on, in addition to real estate stuff, but really trying to kind of pursue just writing all of that stuff out. And that's the stuff I really like talking about. Secretly, I like talking like psychology, mindset, all of that kind of stuff with, real estate investing happens to be the vehicle for a lot of that.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And mindset, like I'm really into the mindset the last couple of years too, not just like with real estate, but just everything in life in general.
Yeah.
I've mentioned before on here, but like Andy Frisella is like a guy that I follow, and he's a big businessman and $1 billion company, and he started a big mindset challenge. It's like a year-long program that kind of gets you into like being just like a killer in life overall. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Ooh, sounds like a year's worth of training. Like, oh man, I'd be like Hercules at the end of that.
it's awesome. I mean, it's like 4 separate like programs that you go through, right? It's like the
That's
first one,
awesome.
it has a lot of fitness into it. You're right.
Yeah.
It's like the first one's like 75 days and all these things you need to do on the road in 75 days. And then the second one that you build on top of those 5 things. And then I don't know, it's just like a year-long process, and you have to really dive into it. A lot of people think it's just a fitness challenge, but it's not. It's not fitness. You have fitness
like
results.
whole life type of thing.
Yeah, just like how to stop being lazy and get up and like do stuff right now instead of like procrastinating. So
it's always amazing to me, and I'm sure like it only takes like the smallest bit of information to change everything. That's what I love about mindset is like it's not moving a boulder uphill. It's like, oh, that one little thing can change everything for the better. I eat it up. I'm like, bring it on.
Yeah, no, definitely. But one thing I think with the generation today, or people, I don't know if it's like a specific generation, Generation Z or Y or W or whatever
letter we're
on these days. Yeah. But just today in general, like everything's so instant with social media and all the gurus. You can pay freaking anybody for advice and training programs and this and that. It's like, how do you really know what you get into? So people are used to instant gratification,
Yeah.
And if stuff doesn't start to work out right away, then they tend to veer off track and then get another shiny object syndrome and go after that, and then go after this and all that sort of thing. So
all the while leaving a bad review for that guru whose program they bought. It's like, we don't know that it was that's not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair because sometimes maybe, they were a guru that's just trying to make money, but most of the time it's that you didn't follow exactly what they said. Because it didn't happen as quickly enough.
If you pay like $50,000 to learn how to flip houses and then you hate flip it, like it's too soon.
Yeah.
Like you've got to do more exploration before because again, if you type in how to be a real estate investor, what's the first thing you're going to see? Like, you should wholesale. Here's how you do it. And people are like, I should wholesale. Maybe, but maybe not. Same with like, go flip a property. This is how you do it. Like, okay. And, and then like to add to what you said about what happens as a consequence is people can get incredibly jaded from real estate investing when, it's a total dumpster fire of what they start with because they didn't take the time to really kind of navigate those waters. And then, but it's like, but now you're missing out on what could be a perfectly good industry just because it started incorrectly, if you want to call it that. So there's a lot of potential repercussions. Like you could just miss out on really good stuff because you went down, I don't want to call it the wrong path, just maybe not the right path, to no fault of your own. Because again, where do you get guidance in this industry? It can be tricky.
Yeah, definitely. So on your book, Not Your How-To Guide, let's kind of go over it and what you found out, what you are putting out there in the book. Like, what are people missing? Like, what are they doing wrong? How do they get into the right mindset and like progress and be successful in real estate investing?
Well, a lot of it is, and I feel bad. It's kind of like, okay, I get it. This is the more boring start to real estate investing because most of us, when we start in real estate, we're like, oh, we're so excited. Like, I want to get a property. So like, I get that if you pause on the how-to guide of how to get the property or whatever, and you kind of go backwards and you're like getting information, like that's boring. I totally get it. But what I kind of do in the book is, I would say 3 different parts if I were to break it down. First is really talking about the industry as a whole. Like, what are the myths? What are the things you need to know? Like, what are the different skills that you need to have to navigate this industry? Because again, it's not a corporate job where you have a manager telling you what to do. And, you're very much on your own. And so I really try and lay out the reality of how, what's involved in being an investor, because you may hate some of those things and that's perfectly fine, but you want to know that before you go diving in or throwing a bunch of money towards something. Like, you just want to be kind of aware of, what we're working with here. And then the second part is really just different concepts for you to consider. Like, I mean, and it's such basic things. That's why I made the subtitle of the book Life Lessons on Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet, because most everything that I talk about can apply to other areas in your life. A lot of the things the ideas I use for myself in entrepreneurship and, relationships and anything that I do, something basic like working to your strengths, not your weaknesses, like really being honest about what those things are. I wish that I could be a house flipper. I really do. And it's not to say that I couldn't. I'm a pretty smart girl. I could probably figure it out, but ultimately it would be swimming upstream. So for me, it's safer to make that like a fun, well, I don't know if it's fun, but like a side project, not something I'm relying on. And instead following what I'm really good at. So basic concepts like that. I talk about things like leveraging. It's not just money that you can leverage. You can leverage relationships. You can leverage other people's skills, resources, whatever. My favorite chapter in there is called The Three True Currencies. We'll maybe talk about that later. And then the end of the book, the last part, I gave the same interview questions to 5 different investors, myself included, and they're all successful in different strategies. And what my intention was with that is to really break down what does an actual day in the life look like? Because if you download, a how to flip properties how-to guide, great. It tells you how to do it, but what does that life actually look like? And, so I talked to a wholesaler, a flipper. I talked to myself about turnkeys, different things to give you a more realistic perspective of, okay, cool, you're choosing this strategy. One of the questions I asked everybody is like, what are the actual skills that you use every day that are absolutely imperative to your success? And those skills that they all mention aren't really talked about in the how-to guides. It's that kind of behind the scenes type of thing. And my intention with all of those interviews is to give everyone that more realistic perspective of what those lives look like in order to help you kind of choose what might be most fitting for you. It's like, gosh, I didn't realize that would be part of whatever strategy. That sounds terrible, or like, ooh, that sounds fun. And you just may not know. So that's kind of how it's broken down, the 3 main sections, I would say. And then, I do I said not your how-to guide, but there is a how-to guide it's actually the steps that I personally took without even knowing it to get out of corporate, how you can just, a step-by-step of how you can kind of more safely get into real estate investing and really find that strategy that has the best chance to help you succeed, from the get-go instead of having to learn it the hard way.
Yeah, no, that's totally true because, for example, like what I'm doing now, I'm just trying to, there's kind of like a wholesaling aspect to my business now, but the main goal is like finding off-market properties for myself to keep or for people I know to buy rental properties, right? And if they don't meet the numbers, then obviously I can pass them on to somebody else because you got to do, what are you going to do? You can't just like let the leads go. But a big part of that is, most days are not spent like writing contracts and like going out to the property and getting checks, right? 99% of the days is like I'm on the phone and I'm calling people, like following up on leads. And I don't really like it, honestly. I mean, I hate doing that.
Why did I not interview you in the book?
I know.
That's it. It's fine. The way you described that is exactly why I decided to do that with all, interviewing everyone, because so if you Googled or downloaded a how-to guide to do what you do, what would you read? It'd be like the going out, everything you just listed that is not what you primarily do. So like you just said, you just spelled out the perfect thing that you spend most of your day doing, and it turns out you hate it. Like those are the exact things that I was trying to capture with each of those investors. Like, tell me those things that nobody else talks about, because those things are going to be the majority of your time. And if you hate them, well, and I tried to really just like pull out all of that hidden information in so many different directions that people don't tell you. So you can try to, and, like your case is how most people are. Like we all get into something and they're like, didn't really like that. And it can help you kind of create, figure out like, well, okay, I'm not digging that. I can move past. So it's not like you have to have it all figured out from the get-go, but in a lot of people's cases, fortunately, it hasn't kicked you out of the industry yet, how much you hate it.
Yeah, no, I mean,
but it does a lot of
now.
people. So,
I don't have a job anymore, so I'm doing it full time. So I kind of got to figure it out. But one thing, the reason why I had an idea what I was going to be doing, and obviously I knew beforehand I didn't think I was going to like it, but my goal is not to do this for very long, right?
Yeah.
Like do this role,
Yep.
right? It's like get it going to a point where it's self-sustaining, making enough money, then I hire an acquisition manager or hire people into the roles I don't like. So
Yep.
you touched earlier on one of the keys is finding out what you're good at.
hmm
How can somebody kind of like, how do people know what they're good at? How can they kind of figure that out and go all in on that?
Well, I mean, one of the best ways is to do things that you're not good at because you'll very quickly figure out
Yeah.
what you might be better at. But, in support of not trying to make mistakes to figure it out, like one of the most basic ways to figure out what you're good at, and this sounds almost too easy, is following the things that you really enjoy. Like, think about it. Who has really enjoyed something that they're terrible at? Maybe some, kind of like side hobbies, or maybe you enjoy like the challenge or you're trying to better yourself or whatever, but like the things you're really good at. And I think for me, through like entrepreneurship and real estate investing, I don't think in the beginning I could have defined what those things were, but I I I knew what I enjoyed doing it when I did it. Like for
Mhm.
instance, I love talking to people. I love doing podcast interviews because we get to talk. Turns out that's actually a skill. It's like, when I was in the engineering world, I used to bug everybody, but when I put, here I am, I have the dream job, like top secret aerospace engineer, flight test, like coolest thing on the planet. And I put my 2-week notice in, which
Yeah.
doesn't happen there very often. Everybody was like, "Where are you going?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Real estate." And they're like, "Oh, no, actually, that kind of makes sense." Because I was like, here's all these introverted engineers doing all their technical whatever. And I'm like, "Hi, want to go to lunch? Hey, what are you doing now?" Bugging them on Instant Messenger. And they're like, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
So I don't know that I could have put my finger on it at the time, but it's like, if you just take the time to kind of watch yourself, like what things do you really enjoy doing? And is there a skill in that type of thing?
Yeah.
But, I hate to say follow the joy because it just kind of sounds like hippie-ish, but it's kind of true because those two things kind of tend to go hand in hand. And I know that the things that I've turned out to be terrible at, I also kind of hated while I was doing them also.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I mean that's step one, is just figure out what you actually like and enjoy, and you'd be surprised at what a big skill set that might actually be tied to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like we mentioned, is like you have to try things that you not sure if you're gonna like,
Yeah.
and then once you start doing them, you might realize you don't. But then that leads
Mhm.
to the next part is that leverage that you mentioned. So once you start doing something and you realize maybe I don't really like this or I'm not very good at it,
Yeah.
then you can use that leverage, right? And talk about
Yep.
what the leverage is.
Oh gosh, leverage can be so many things. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh boy. Like,
Yeah.
it gets into, we all know leveraging in terms of like getting a mortgage or getting a loan, leveraging money, other people's
Mhm.
money. So most of us are familiar with that. But like, let's say, I mean, as an entrepreneur talk, if I hire someone, so I hire a web guy. So in the very beginning of my business, I did my own website, which I wish I had taken screenshots like, I would love to see that website now. Is so bad. I was so proud of it at the beginning, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't think I was very good. So let's say I hire a web guy and he's a web expert. I'm actually leveraging his expertise, his knowledge, his skills, his whatever. um, let's say you are a house flipper and maybe you do a lot of the work yourself and you're really good at floors and walls, but you're not so good plumbing, and you have a friend who has a lot of plumbing experience. You can leverage that through him. So it's like you're leveraging other people, whether it's their expertise, their skills, their resources. I could call you and say, "Hey, do you know a guy who can help me with this?" That's me leveraging your resources. You could do the same with me. "Hey, do you know somebody? I'm looking for whatever." Um, Basically using other people's stuff is leveraging, and that it's a much more expansive kind of conversation because like um an example that I can give is like, again, an entrepreneurship example is I have people who work for me, and one of the biggest conversations in entrepreneurship is the debate of like, when should you hire other people? A lot of entrepreneurs don't want to hire other people because it's like, I know they won't do as good a job as I will. But what I've seen with the people that have worked with me for a very long time, uh, the end product is actually so much better because they're all doing things they love to do. They're all doing things they're fantastic at. And I happen to be terrible at all of those things. So I could try to keep it all to myself and do it myself and save the money from paying them and blah, blah, blah. But like at the end of the day, I'm not going to get as good of an end result if I try and do it all myself. So it's bringing other people into the equation, bringing in their skills, bringing in their resources, bringing in anything from other people to help essentially, like, I don't want to say build your empire, because not everyone's trying to build an empire, but to grow as much as you can. You cannot do it all yourself. I'm sorry, none of us have skills in every single thing required. So why not let other people help? And that's leveraging.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of to tie this all together right here is like, you should do what you are good at, right? And if
Yep.
you get into a type of real estate or a type of business, whether it's not real estate or not, that um, you're really going to enjoy, and you might not enjoy all of them, but you have to try them first. Once you
Yeah.
try them, you might like the whole overall picture of doing the real estate, whether
Yeah.
it's flipping or apartments or self storage or something. But once you get into it, you're going to start doing all the work. You're going to realize what you're not good at, which
Yep.
is what you probably don't enjoy, because nobody enjoys doing things they're not good at.
Yep.
And then what you are good at, which is what you probably will enjoy. Then what you're not enjoying, try to leverage that off. Like for
Yep.
me, for example, so everybody knows, I hate cold calling and talking to people on the phone. You know what I mean?
Does anyone actually like cold calling?
Well, I don't know if they like it, but
Some people are better at it.
but there's people that are great at it, right? And
I'm
so
like, hey, do you want to buy something? They're like, no. I'm like, okay.
yeah, it's hard, or like to learn to like ask the right questions, or like be more combative or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I hired a cold caller. Or with the podcast, like,
Yep.
I hate sitting on the computer and like doing editing and stuff, because I'm just
Yep.
not good at it. I've never done it before. So I have a great person that helps me out, and she does all the editing, right? It's like,
Yep.
start leveraging these things off that I don't really like doing. So then I
Yep.
can get to the not even more dollar productive hour, which that's
Yeah.
part of it too, but stuff that I enjoy doing more.
Yeah. And I think there's such a big lesson in what we're talking about, and especially what you're talking about, is something very important for people to understand is, here I am saying like, oh, I'm going to try and save you from having to do all of these things that you hate so you can figure out what you actually like. That will be part of the process. My intention is to kind of lessen how much you have to deal with all that, or, prevent you from paying the $50,000 for a flipping course if you're never going to be a flipper. But, like I said, I went to undergrad all the way through a master's degree for engineering. And it turns out I hate engineering. I do love spreadsheets, but that's about the extent of it.
Oh,
But,
good.
one could argue that that was a lot of years spent, a lot of money spent pursuing this thing, only to find out that I hate it. And I think such a big important lesson in that is, a lot of people hold back from like, well, if I do this strategy, like, what if it doesn't work? Okay, well, change course. And like exactly what you're saying is, if you get into something, you'll start to kind of see what's working and what's not working. Follow those things, but you have to actually get into it to start seeing those things. So many people hold themselves out. It sounds so contrary to what I was saying before, is like, don't rush in. And I'm like, get in. So it's a balance of like, don't hold out, learn, get a good bit of education before you get in, but don't resist getting in, because things will change down the road. How you do them is going to change down the road. And I think this is a big lesson in why, let's say that the most successful house flipper on the planet puts their personal how-to guide on the internet, and they're like, here's my answers. You're like, okay, well, why does it not work for most people? Because that person who created that has been through so many rounds of different things, and that task list or to-do list or whatever is really tailored to what works for them, which is very unlikely going to be exactly what works for you. A lot of it may be very beneficial, but it's that you've got to have that willingness to basically do exactly what you're talking about, is get into it, but then kind of figure and tailor as you go. It's huge.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, you mentioned earlier you had this thing, you said we'll get to it later. It's like the three, it's later in your book. The
Three true
three,
currencies is my favorite.
yeah, yeah. So I forgot. I was gonna say three rings. I was like, that's not right. What the heck are you talking about here? Because I don't know, because I'm weird. So get into that. Go ahead and tell us what you're talking about when it comes to that.
So this concept, I kind of came up with it over the years. I have no idea how. It literally helps me design every single thing I do, whether it's real estate investing, entrepreneurship, life, whatever. Is I have come up with a theory that I actually think there are three true currencies that we're all working with. Money, we obviously all know. That's number one. For sure, we're used to giving and receiving money in exchange for things.
Yeah.
But the two that I feel are not talked about, and they should be, and they can in many cases be more important than the money, is time and sanity. So my thought is that at any point, if you're trying to get something, whether it's a service, a product, or whatever, you're going to give one or more of those currencies in order to get that, either money, time, or sanity, or some combination thereof. And so like the easiest example for real estate with me is I'm involved with turnkey rental properties, and turnkeys are more expensive than a value add property or one that you're going to go do the work yourself. Well, when I rank those currencies for myself, by far, by a very large margin, sanity is my number one. If anything is impeding on my sanity and my happiness, I'm not a deal breaker. And time, when I got into real estate, one thing that held me out of real estate investing for a very long time was how much time it was going to take. I wasn't trying to leave corporate to take on another job. I wanted a way to go lay on the beach. Like that was what I was looking for. So it's like, well, if I go hands-on try and flip a shack, that sounds busy. So like time and sanity for me have always, in most cases, are more important than money. So like turnkeys, I'm paying more with the money currency, but I'm saving tons on time and sanity because I don't really have to spend time on them. I certainly don't really have to spend my sanity on it. So, some examples I give in the book, like something basic life-wise, like let's say you're pondering, should you hire a housekeeper? Well, a lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to pay someone if I can do it myself. Well, okay, so money, time, sanity. How long is it going to take you to do the same quality job the housekeeper's going to take versus how much they're going to charge you? And do you like housekeeping work? If you do, cool, do it. Save the money and grab the joy out of it. If you hate housework and it's going to cost you really less than what your time would be worth, it's that balance, and it's different for every scenario.
Hmm.
What I rank higher in maybe the housekeeping department might be different than in real estate or entrepreneurship. Like, we talked about me putting out a book, and that was a job in itself of learning how to publish a book. And in that case, it actually did take my time and sanity. I did save a little bit of money, but I actually wanted to learn that skill. So there was a reason for me to sacrifice my time and sanity and trying to figure that out because I wanted to learn it. Just about every day of my life, somehow this concept comes into play because I make my decisions based off of it. It's like, okay, do I want to fight this battle, or what's more important to me? What's more important, money, time, or sanity in any given situation? And it can surprisingly change how you do things. Huge.
I totally agree with that. And I never really thought about it before. And my wife, she's like extremely hard worker. Like she freaking does everything, right? She'll like work her, not that she has a job, but she has like a personal training, nutrition
Mhm.
business. She has the 4 kids to deal with. She's got uh, tons of stuff going on. And we always used to think like, why do people hire housekeepers or
Uh,
nannies, right? We're like, that's so crazy. Why don't you just like work harder and like hustle more and like get stuff done around the house?
the famous message, obviously, we
Yeah.
should work harder.
But then we're like the older we get, and like we're like, man, we wish we had this. Not that we don't have a nanny or a housekeeper yet, but we're more on board with hiring one because we
Yeah.
have friends that have them, and they're able to like spend more quality time with their kids. They're not as stressed
Hmm.
out with them. If we're talking the family route, they're not as stressed out with them. They're not trying to get all this stuff done. So then they're happier all the time. The whole
Yep.
family's happier because then they take like that housework off the table.
Yep.
Or, even talk about it. Some people say, why would you ever buy a jet if you're really rich? Right. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, if you're like traveling and flying 100 days a year and you're making deals because you're going to fly to those, well, why don't you just like spend like what you think's a lot of money now on that jet,
Yeah.
but you can now do double the deals because you can go double
Yep.
the places and it's less stressful. It's like easier to get there. So that's what people that are,
Yep.
at that level, they rationalize spending $5
Yeah.
million or $10 million on a jet. So it's
Yeah, and
cool.
exactly the examples you're giving, like I love in both examples, you bring up the happiness that you guys can accelerate with the housekeeper
Mhm.
and with the corporate jet or whatever. Like, not only can you do double the deals, you don't have to like find an airline schedule. You don't have to sit and book that. You can just like call up, like you bring up the sanity components of of both of those, which are
Mhm.
huge. And and we all grew up with this mindset, but like people look at the money as like a tit for tat. It's like, well, but if I spend this, then this da 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 da. But you have to get rid of that because, like, I say there's no price tag on sanity. But again, I rank sanity very high. It's the only thing I really care about. I'm
Yeah.
like, I will sooner sacrifice everything else as long as I get to keep my sanity. um, if you have a partner and multiple children and a full-time job, time might be your highest ranked thing. And
Hmm.
so when you, exactly the examples you're giving, when you actually break it down and look at those three different components and those currencies that you can be paying with, which do you actually want to be paying in? Like if the, to not hire the housekeeper, what are you sacrificing? Insanity and time. Like what are those two things causing?
Yeah.
And it sounds like over analytical and whatever, but it really makes a difference when we just don't go tit for tat with different, pennies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the more you do it and the more you look at things in that manner, like the easier it gets, right? At
Yeah.
first, it might be analytical because you're like, well, this dollar amount's going to save me this much time. It's going to save me
Yeah.
this, like, but eventually it's kind of like comes second nature, I would assume. You're looking
Yeah.
at everything to that lens. So then you're just more happy and like more stress free. And then your mind's more
Yep.
open to pursue things you might enjoy that you're good at. And then you can leverage the time that you're not good at. See, it's all intertwined
Yeah.
here. Um,
Yep.
Okay, so that's all great information. I suggest everybody go get that book. Tell everybody the title again so they have the full thing.
It's called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing: Life Lessons on Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet.
Okay, perfect. So everybody go get that book or read it on Kindle, wherever you guys can get it. But I did have
Or I
or
may have set up a link where you could get it for free.
okay, we'll touch that at the end. I have another question
But
before
if
we
you want
get
to go
there.
get it, for sure, it's on Amazon.
Yeah. No, everybody buy the book.
Go buy the book. Even
Yeah,
if you get a free copy, buy the book. I'm a new author. It'll help.
that's it.
It's
What do you?
you certainly have a friend who wants it, so buy it for your friend.
Yeah, see, give it as a gift. Um, I try to ask most people this when they come on the podcast now with crazy Corona time, we're maybe we're
I
in the
like that
middle of
crazy
it.
Corona time.
Yeah, maybe we're at the end of it. What do you see kind of with the real estate industry going forward over the
Oh,
next year? Do you think the market's going to continue to go up for a little bit? Think we're going to have a recession? I mean, it's hard to tell. Nobody knows, but everybody has thoughts on it.
oh boy, don't they? If I had a nickel for every thought I've heard on this from random people.
Yeah.
A recession in general, I can't really speak to. I'm not well versed enough in economical factors, because a recession and the economy and everything involves a lot more than just real estate. And that I just, I don't know. I can't make predictions on that. I don't know that any of us can make an official prediction because at this point we're really operating in a non-predictive, is that even a word? Non-predictable way. COVID
Yeah.
wasn't predictable. The time frame with COVID has not been predicted. Who would have guessed that we're still dealing with it, 9 months later, 10 months later?
Hmm.
None of us really know, and that's kind of been one of the scary things for a lot of people is none of us know what we're working with here. So I think if anyone claims to say, well, this is going to happen, I think they're nuts because okay. As far as real estate specifically, it's been interesting. I have not been this busy with real estate in 4 or 5 years. I was really busy as we were still coming out of the crash, and then, as prices kind of got up and were a lot higher, business slowed down. All of a sudden, I don't think you could have paid me to guess that a global pandemic would have shot my business through the roof because everybody wants to buy properties. I'm like, what?
I
I thought I
know.
was
It's
going to be
weird.
sitting around watching Netflix for all of quarantine.
Yeah.
So I am involved with turnkey rental properties, and the companies who offer turnkey rental properties, a huge source of where they get these distressed properties to do the work on is foreclosures. And as everyone knows, the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums are stopping all of that. The foreclosure market is basically ceased for the moment, temporarily until these moratoriums lift. And so a lot of the turnkey providers I work with are out of inventory or they're low on inventory. They're on hold, they're on a wait list. It's a supply and demand type of situation. So what happened with COVID is demand went through the roof. At the same time, supply plummeted. People
Mhm.
were pulling their houses off the market. Suddenly people don't know the fate of their jobs, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly there's a shortage of supply. Then the foreclosure market closes up. And at the same time, interest rates are rock bottom. And I think a lot of it too is that people are seeing, kind of speaking to a possible recession, is like there's a question about currency at this, like currency as we all know it, like the dollar. There's a question about the dollar at this point where we have a coin shortage. We don't know what the economy is doing. Like there are such big shifts happening, and I think people are getting a little bit fearful of what's going to happen to the dollar? And, my personal stance is there's one thing we absolutely know for sure is people will always need somewhere to live. Period. Like that, so real estate as an investment strategy is huge for me because I know that fact. Everything else in my opinion, can kind of go bust, except people have to have somewhere to live. And the other dynamic that COVID caused, which kind of supports turnkeys, which is why I've been so busy, is people are flocking out of big crowded apartment complexes in crowded cities and moving to the single family houses in the suburbs. They're like,
Yeah.
ooh, germs. Get away from me. Like
Yeah.
nobody wants to be near other humans. And I have properties in Atlanta, and one of my property managers said that she has had multiple properties for rent in downtown Atlanta, which is normally the hot spot. She cannot get them rented. Their condos cannot get them rented. She's like, I barely even get applicants. It's unbelievable. But
Huh.
the single family homes or maybe the duplexes in the suburbs, like wildfire, like everyone's moving to those. And it just happens to be that turnkeys typically are single family or duplexes slightly outside of town.
Hmm.
So, like I say the turnkey thing to kind of say, like, I'm not involved in all aspects of real estate. I'm specifically on the turnkey side, which is the side I can speak from. And just my experience with those is demand is so high. I mean, we have backlogs of buyers at this point, and we don't have enough inventory to fill. So as far as like how that's going to play out through 2021, a lot of it's going to depend on the foreclosure moratoriums. Like it sounds like since Biden got in, it sounds like he's hoping to extend those. That's going to further keep a clamp on the foreclosure market. I don't know how that affects everyone outside of turnkey world, but I would imagine it's similar. Everyone's trying to get foreclosures. Now there are none.
Hmm.
But there is also talk. I was actually out at a really cool like in-person podcast interview, if you want to call it that. Like we were rock crawling Jeeps in Arizona. Like it was the coolest thing ever.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of these guys they're huge investors, and they're tied in with the institutional investors. And they were all saying like, because a lot of people are expecting when the foreclosures all release that there's going to be this like huge wave of inventory. And so the supply demand dynamic is going to change, and there's going to be so much supply, prices will have to drop. Well, the institutional investors, at least from what I'm hearing, are planning to scoop up a very large portion of the foreclosure. Like they know it's coming, and
Yeah.
they have the buying power to get them all before any of us can even get our hands on it. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people have been expecting that wave of supply all of a sudden to drop real estate prices, and I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of who knows type of thing, but all I know right now is demand is through the roof, supply is low, and I kind of foresee that sticking around for a good little while more, for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing that, like what you just mentioned, I totally agree with, is that a lot of people are comparing it to 2008, and they're all like
Totally
people.
different.
Well, for one, it's totally different, but for two, people are hoping that it's going to be 2008 because everybody always says,
Oh
"Oh,
God, I'd love it.
if I would have gotten to real estate back then, I would have
Yep.
made so much money." Well, for one, you were alive during that time and you didn't make a lot of money. But like myself, I was in real estate, but I just didn't take advantage as much as I
Yep.
should have. But
And
for
I bought,
two,
but I wish I'd bought way more
yeah, and
based
we
on
didn't
when I was
know what
on
was
one.
happening, right? We didn't
Yeah.
know that cycle. We didn't know that it was at the bottom. It's going to be in for probably 100 years. We didn't know that that was like the worst recession that we've had
Yeah.
in a long time. But the institutional guys, all these guys that were younger back then in 2008 and during that time, they know what happened then, right?
Yep.
So if it does happen again,
They're ready.
now they have billions of dollars.
Yep.
They're ready where they weren't ready before. That's why
Yep.
us little guys got to take advantage of it. Now they're ready.
100%.
So,
And
oh,
even like taking what you're talking about, the 2008 crisis,
mhm,
talking about a general recession, because people kind of look at it in two different ways. It's like, well, if the entire economy goes bust, housing prices will be affected. Or, people sometimes don't separate those two things. But what a lot of people don't realize is the 2008 market crash was the only one that actually had housing prices drop. If you actually look back in history at all of the other ones, including the Great Depression, housing prices did not drop. And the
mhm,
reason they dropped for 2008 was because it was actually the whole thing was caused by the mortgage crisis. So that's something to know going forward, is that even if we go into a total, are we technically in a recession now? We might be. I don't know what
I don't know.
label we're at.
I
But if
mean,
we go into a huge recession, even to the extent of the Great Depression, no matter how big you want, housing prices didn't drop then. And so people are kind of wrongly correlating a crash because we were all around for 2008. So it's like, oh, big crash, cheap housing, woohoo! Like
Yeah.
that may not happen. It didn't happen for the 4 before that.
Yeah.
So again, there's so much speculation about like, well, I don't want to buy a property now because if we have a crash, first of all, if you're constantly waiting on a crash, you may never get a property. Second, even if it crashes, housing prices may not be affected and the interest rates may shoot up. There's so many unknowns. You just have to buy intelligently. Like, just like you said, like if we could all go back in time, we all would have done 2008. I would not have bought my house in the August of 2008 because it crashed right after that. Like
Right.
hindsight's 20. Well, I hate saying hindsight's 2020 now because that's traumatizing. But yeah, there's speculation and there's just, to me, there's so many dynamics that most people aren't really savvy enough to fully understand, myself included. I only know what I know. And, there's just, you also have to be careful of who's giving you the speculations also, because, when have you ever heard that the other recessions didn't have a drop in housing prices? Never. Everyone thinks housing prices drop with a recession because of 2008. It may not be true. So,
Yeah.
I think we all have to be careful about playing with our own crystal balls. Like, oh, well, I know what's going to happen.
Just
See ya.
underwrite the deals, and if they make sense, buy them. If they don't make sense, don't buy them.
Yeah. Yeah. Be smart on what you're buying. Because it's like, I don't want to call anything recession proof, but you can buy you just have to, it goes back to what I'm talking about in the book. Like, you've got to learn this information before you pull the trigger on a property. Like, if you take the time, and it does not take long, if you can learn a certain kind of bullet point list, it happens to be in my book, a certain bullet point list of things before you invest in your first property, you're going to be so much better prepared. And you know what? Worst case, if you buy a property for more expensive and then there is a housing crash, great. Buy cheap then too. It's not, you can't gauge everything you do today based on what you think might happen tomorrow.
Totally. Well, with that, where can people get your book for free?
So I set it up where you can get a free digital copy of it. If you go to, oh boy, let's see, what link did I say? So if you go to hipsterinvestments.com, which is my company's name, /365 free book, all one word, no spaces or whatever. I set it up so you can get a free digital copy of it there. If you're like me and you have to physically hold a book, there's a link to the Amazon thing. Or if you want to support a brand new author and you want to buy some copies for friends and family, change their lives, hopefully.
Yeah.
I would appreciate the business. And at a minimum, like if you check out the book, free or not, if you would be willing to leave a review afterwards, that would be phenomenal. I'd be so stoked for that. I can't even tell you. So
Totally.
yeah, and also I love feedback. Like if you read the book and you hate it and you're like, oh man, you missed, like tell me. Like I can include that in the next book. Like I'd love to interact with all you guys and see what you think about the book. It's my first one, and hey, we'll see what happens.
Definitely. Okay. Well, Allie, thanks for all that information. Everybody, it'll be in the show notes, and then go to hipsterinvestments hipsterinvestments.com/365 book.
Free book.
Free book. 365 free book.
365 free book.
365 free book. All right. Yep. Cool. Allie, well, thanks again. And
thanks for having me back. We'll have to make it like a yearly thing.
Let's do it. All right. Have a good day.
See you. You too.